Website's called Founded on Truth. This presentation, and we're videotaping, and I'm going to be giving a copy, so you will be able to access all the graphics. If you go to foundedontruth.com and sign up, it's free. You get updates. You will see a previous presentation with the graphics. You'll see additional information. We make everything available. Founded on Truth is a super PAC. It is not a nonprofit organization. I'm sure you've heard about the IRS and nonprofit organizations lately, especially conservative ones. So we took down all of our nonprofits, and my treasurer was Ronald Reagan's treasurer. We've known each other since God was a baby. We created a super PAC because now we don't have to talk to the IRS. We only have to talk to the Federal Elections Commission. And we actually do have freedom of speech. So the website's called Founded on Truth, and this will be available there for you. Give us a couple days. Page down. Now, what you will see in this presentation is original documents. You don't have to read them, we'll pull out quotes. I only wrote one page in this entire presentation, and it has my name on it, you'll see that. Why am I using original documents? So that you know that this either came from the federal government or the Pennsylvania Department of Education in one of their either backup documents or in grants that they wrote to the federal government asking for money. Why did I use grants? For the same reason that when you go to a bank and say, I made $100 last year, the bank says, yeah, can I see your income tax return? Because you might lie to the bank, but you probably didn't lie to the IRS. When Pennsylvania submits a grant to the federal government asking for and receiving money, and they say they're doing X in that grant, and then they tell you that they're doing Y, they probably are doing X, because they did not lie to the federal government on a document that they used to receive money. That's a contract. So that document is telling you the truth. So if you want to know what's happening for real, read the government documents, and that's what I did. I went back and read the grant applications. So everything you're going to see is an actual grant from the Department of Pennsylvania or backup documents from the federal government telling them how to spend the grant. This is a letter from the U.S. Department of Education before, you see the date, January 15th, 2009, before the current occupant of the White House took office. This is not a Democrat initiative or a Republican initiative. This is a Washington initiative, and it's cut across party lines. Take down. In this grant, the Undersecretary of Education is congratulating Pennsylvania on how their standards and their assessments have met federal requirements. So Pennsylvania's assessment has been being evaluated and either approved or disapproved by Washington for quite a long time. Why does that matter? Why do we care if somebody is approving our assessment system? I'm your boss. I want you to come to work at 9 o'clock every morning, but I stroll in at 9:30. If anybody walked into my office, would you see people at their desk at 9 o'clock? No, you'd see people sort of strolling in anywhere in that first half hour, taking their time, getting their coffee, talking at the water cooler. I'm your boss. I want you to be at work at 9 o'clock, and at 9:01, I'm standing at that front door with a clipboard, marking your name off if you're late. Will everybody be at work at 9 o'clock? Absolutely. Because the test, the assessment, the measurement determines your behavior. So in education, if I control the assessment, and the assessment counts for teacher promotion, for teacher evaluation or student promotion or graduation, if I control the assessment, I control what's happening. And Washington has been saying for quite some time that they've had control of state assessments. Take them. Okay? How do they know that? Well, the states all had to submit all of their information in what was called an accountability workbook. Go ahead. Again. In the accountability workbook, they talked about the data systems. Now, Pennsylvania got a $4 million grant, this was back in 2009, to implement the state data system. In the PR about Common Core, what the department has said in their documents is there is no new data system associated with Common Core. The operative word in that sentence is new. The data system has been around for a while. It's a longitudinal system. We're going to look at it tonight. They didn't create it for Common Core. The operative word was new. Go ahead. Go ahead. This is Pennsylvania's Accountability Workbook, and Chapter 6 was Tracking Student Progress. Go ahead. And again. And in that, they said to the feds that by 2006, they would have unique student identifiers in 100 school districts, and by 2007, they would have unique student identifiers for every student in every school district. Go ahead. Again. They used the $4 million grant to build that data system with the student identifiers. Go ahead. And again. The system is called the PA Secure ID. It says it can enable tracking of students across districts. Now, what the marketing says is the students are anonymous. And I've actually spoken to someone from the department, and what I was told was, see, there's one database that has the ID number and the information, and then there's another one that has the name and the information. And the people who work on the ID number are not the people who work on the name, so that makes it anonymous. And I wanted to laugh out loud. But you can match them. Just because the same person isn't sitting at the both desks, the systems can be matched. Additionally, okay, I don't know your name. Don't tell me your name. Okay, we won't talk to you. I don't know your name. But if I know that you are a 7-year-old boy in the Outer Podunk School District who has an AB average, is not involved in sports, lives with both parents, has a good health record, and your family's socioeconomic level is between $25,000 and $30,000 a year, do I actually need your name to find you? No. When you collect enough data points, you can find them anyway. The department really isn't interested in a specific name. When they build this process, what they're looking at is subgroups of students. We know that this curriculum will work with this subgroup. Students who have this demographic will respond this way. But are they collecting all of that information? Yes. And can they track students across districts? If I can track you across a district, I can find you. If you're anonymous, I don't know who you are or where you are. So you are not, in fact, anonymous because they're telling us we can track students across districts. Go ahead. Now, when President Obama was brought into office, you remember he passed the stimulus bill, the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, ARRA. As part of the stimulus bill, there was a grant made available, funding made available to the U.S. Department of Education. It was called the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund. Go ahead. And in that fund, go ahead, they made $53.6 billion available to the states in education. That's a lot of money. Go ahead. And again. Part of that was Race to the Top, which is what everybody talks about when they're talking about Common Core. But that's not really where Common Core began. Go ahead. In this big stabilization fund, the states had to agree to do 4 things. One of them was to make progress toward rigorous college and career-ready standards. Now, in marketing, it's called the law of the 7th mentioning. You have to hear it 7 times before you know you heard it. I worked on a congressional campaign once, and we sent 6 mailers. So you got them Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Every day you got a mailer. And then the next day, we called you. And the first person would say, why did you send me 6 mailers? And the second person would say, no, I don't remember seeing anything. And the third person would say, yeah, I think I saw one. The law of the 7th mentioning. Rigorous college and career-ready standards. Every time the department talks about these standards, they will say the word rigorous in front of them. They never use a synonym, and they never don't say the word because they want that word to be in your mind. As we walk through tonight, we'll look at how they define rigorous, but it is a marketing technique. The states had to agree to establish a pre-K to college and career data system. It was called a P through 20 system. P is pre-kindergarten, K through 12 is what you think, 13, 14, 15, 16, college, 4 years, 17, 18, 19, 20, workforce. It's a womb to tomb data system. And the states had to agree to establish and use them so they could track the students. So that was part of this stabilization fund. The states had to do 4 areas, and we'll see all 4. One of them was money for teachers. The teachers got paid, and that was the carrot that got handed out. We're going to give you more money for your education budget so you can keep all the teachers' jobs. And if you remember, President Obama made that promise during his election. This was how he kept it. And the last one was support for struggling schools. Go ahead. And again. The states had to tell the feds that they would, in fact, do these things, and they had to assure that there was a whole process they had to go through so the federal government could track their progress in those 4 areas. Go ahead. The way that the federal government did it is the Stabilization fund allocation was made available in two pieces. So you sent an application, you got the first half, and then you had to come back and show them how you were doing, and then you got the second half. It's like a leash. If you ever had kids with allowances, you know how we do that. Same thing. Go ahead. And go ahead. The race to the top was part of this appropriation. It was only $4.35 billion out of the $53 billion, so it was a smaller piece. Go ahead. Now, the federal government, when you submit a grant to the federal government, and as you heard in my intro, for a number of years I worked for the U.S. Department of Education. I reviewed education reform initiatives. Anybody who sent a grant in like this, I was one of the people that got it. And I read it and said, you get money, you don't. Now, I was at the low level, so I was pretty much a you don't get money person. I was the checkoff person. But the U.S. Department of Education trained me to read all these grants. It's always nice when your opponent trains you to work against them. It's such fun. All of the grants look the same. The feds give you a packet and say, fill this out. We want it in this format. We want it to look like this. This is the cover of the packet for the Stabilization Fund grant. It comes right from the Department of Education. Go ahead. This is the cover page. Go ahead. And each governor, that's who applied for the money, when your state rep and state senator say, I don't know anything about this, they are telling you the truth. They do not know anything about this. No legislature in any state had anything to do with how this money moved. It went from the federal government, the governors signed it along with secretaries of education, that they're called different things in different states, but the Secretary of Education in each state. It bypassed the legislature completely. When they signed it, the governor had to say, to the best of my knowledge and belief, all of the information is true, just like on your income tax, right? Above your signature, you have to say that it's all true. The governor had to certify that it was true as well. Go ahead. And again. This is Pennsylvania's, and in June of 2009, Ed Rendell, who was the governor at the time, and Jerry Sahorchek, who was our Secretary of Education at the time, signed Pennsylvania's application. Go ahead. And again. In the application, each state had to assure the federal government that they would establish the data system. Now, the feds wanted all the data systems to look the same. So they passed a law called the America Competes Act, and in the law, they said, these are the pieces that have to be in a data system. So the data system is mandated by the federal government by statute. It is actually a federal law. Go ahead. Go ahead. They also, by federal law, had to move toward the Common Core standards. So this is, when people say it's state initiated, Washington didn't do it. Yes, Washington did do it. It's in the America Competes Act. Go ahead. Now this is actually the America Competes Act. You don't need to read this. Washington is going to give us a very nice chart that will tell you what's in the standards. I just wanted you to see the language of the law. There were 12 required elements, and the America Competes Act mandated all 12. Go ahead. And go ahead. Each state, go ahead, had to submit baseline data. Remember, every federal application looks the same, so everybody's baseline data was in Appendix B. What's baseline data? Well, where are you right now? How far along are you right now toward the Common Core standards and the database? Every state had to tell Washington, this is where we're standing now, so that then Washington could evaluate your grant to get you where you needed to go. Go ahead. Pennsylvania did submit an Appendix B. Ed Rendell signed it. Go ahead. Here's our Appendix B. Go ahead. There's the 4 areas we talked about, was equity and teacher distribution, the collection of data, the standards and assessment, and supporting struggling schools. States had to do all 4. They couldn't say, I'll do 1 and 3, 2 and 4, just 1. They had to do all 4 elements to get the money. Go ahead. And again. Each state, when they submitted their data, it went to the Federal Center for Education Achievement. They surveyed all the states, and they basically ranked all the states. They assessed all the information that they put in and gave a ranking to every state. Go ahead. And again. They ranked them on the data. Go ahead. And again. Each state then got a letter saying, this is how you ranked, and this is what you have to do. And then Washington made a chart so that everybody could see how every state fit together. Go ahead. Here's the chart. If you were green, you were approved. Pennsylvania's green. If you were red, you were not approved. They didn't like your assessment. They didn't like what you're doing with data. California was red. If you were orange or yellow, depending on what color your eyes see that as, just like the lights, you were, well, maybe it's okay, but you have some things you have to do to finish the process. So the federal government actually looked at and approved and then ranked all of the states in their assessment system and in their collection of data. Go ahead. Now, that's a lot of information, and you're probably confused. And so were all the states. So Washington held training seminars where state departments of education could bring people in so that they could learn how to do this. This is the documents that they used at the training seminars. And you can see it's from the Department of Education, and it's dated November of 2009. Go ahead. What they talked about was an education plan. Remember those rigorous standards? Do you notice literate by 3rd grade? My kids could read at the end of 1st. Probably your kids could too. But now it's literacy by 3rd grade. And we move all the way down to career. Go ahead. Now, how do we know that? Well, on one side we have the standards and assessments, which is everybody is talking about. And what you hear the department say over and over again is, this isn't curriculum. These are just standards. These aren't curriculum. I've been a teacher for over 30 years. I've taught everything from preschool through college. This is 3rd grade. My standard is every child in my classroom by the end of this year will know their times tables. If you walk into my 3rd grade math class, what will you see the children doing? Times tables. Because if I don't teach it, they can't meet the standard. And if I give a test, what will the test be on? Times tables. Because if I don't test it, I won't know that they learned it, so I won't know if they met the standard. Standards always drive curriculum. They can't help it. They're connected, and that's why you see the words aligned instruction. If I change the standard and control the test, I control what's happening in your classroom. Go ahead. And how do I know? Well, I need a data system. Now our data system is necessarily bad. No, every teacher has a data system. It's called her grade book. You walk into a parent-teacher conference and say, why did my little Johnny get an 86? And the teacher opens the grade book and says, well, because they got this many test scores and they didn't do homework. That's a data system. The difference here is this data system goes all the way to Washington. So it's a data system where you don't have control, you don't even have knowledge of everything that is in it. Go ahead. We talked about the money comes in 2 parts. The blue part was the first half of the stabilization money. They got the most there so they could get started, and then if they complied, they could get the second half. Go ahead. After that, all of the additional little grants became available, including the Race to the Top money and money for the data systems. Go ahead. 2 phases. It began, the governors had to sign assurances, and we saw Ed Rendell's signed assurance a little bit earlier tonight. Go ahead. How did it work? The states reviewed their existing assessments. What do you already have? Then they would revise them to match what they want. In the middle, do you see Title I? Our funds, that's the stabilization money. Title I, that is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It is the granddaddy funding mechanism that Washington uses to funnel money down to the states in education. And it's roped into this process. So I was in Harrisburg 2 weeks ago chatting about this with some of our state senators, and what they said is that the representatives of the Department of Education are saying, but if we don't do it, we'll lose all $5 billion in federal money. Now, that's called a bluff. If you ever play poker, sometimes you call the bluff. This would be one of those times. But the reason they're using the $5 billion number is it's the Title I money, and it's because they roped it all together. Now, after you revised, then you could apply for your Phase 2 money, and the feds would know what you did because the data system would be in place so they could track it. And then you could look at all of the additional funding mechanisms such as Race to the Top. Go ahead. So what's in the data system? This is the federal data system document that they used in training. Go ahead. They said, it comes at the bottom, you see NCES, that's the National Center for Education Statistics. So this is Washington's kind of database central. It's their document. And they're going to evaluate teachers and know if you have skills and simplify reporting. Go ahead. They want to know how participation ranks. They want to look at an indicator system. Go ahead. And they ranked all the states. So where were states in putting post-secondary data? Well, Pennsylvania was in progress back in 2009 in getting college data into the database. Go ahead. In 2009, we had not begun to put labor data in the database at that time. Go ahead. Where were they going? Well, they wanted to add early childhood data, post-secondary, and labor. They wanted to connect teachers and students. Why? Because teachers typically look at stuff like this and go, somebody's getting a degree. This is stupid. Closing my classroom door and know what works. But if I can connect the teacher and the student, then I know that Mrs. Blankenschmiel's students in the 3rd grade class in the Outer Podunk School District aren't doing very well, and I can tie those students back to Mrs. Blankenschmiel and hold her accountable to teach this. So it ties the teacher into the system as well. They're going to provide data to research, community, and public stakeholders. What you hear is that all of these data systems will comply with federal law for privacy concerns. There is a federal law. It's called the Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act, commonly called FERPA. Put the initials together. When Mr. Obama became president in 2011, 2012, they changed the regulations. It takes a while to do that, so it went over a year, over the January timeframe. And they rewrote the regulations surrounding the Educational Rights and Privacy Act to say that anyone with a legitimate educational interest could have access to the data. Legitimate educational interest was a researcher or anyone who was a vendor to the schools. If you sold educational materials to the schools, you had a legitimate educational interest. If you have been following this debate at all, you've heard Bill Gates' name come up over and over again as a big funder of this effort. As a matter of fact, Bill Gates has poured $100 million into the database system, which is a computerized system that holds the information, like all the demographic information on the students, and he can have access, and he owns a company called Microsoft. Why would you think he would fund this? There's a huge financial interest in here for him. Go ahead. So what are the elements? Remember I told you they would give us a nicer chart. Here it is. There's a student enrollment information, information on graduates, transfers, and dropouts, state assessment scores, information on students not tested. Perhaps your children are homeschooled. Perhaps they go to a private school. Perhaps you opted out of the PSSA. You're still in the database. They just get the information a different way. College readiness test scores, a teacher identifier system. Not only is there a number for every child, there's a number for every teacher. Student transcript, moving to college and audit system. They go back in and check the data to make sure it's up to date and correct. Ability to share data from preschool through college. And then identifier for the student. So this follows the child everywhere they go. Go ahead. There's our P through 20 system. You notice at the top, post-secondary, early education, data on teacher and staff. So we're collecting information on the teachers as well. If you move to the bottom, you see finance records and health records are included in the data system. Now, how many kindergartners do you think have financial records? Or perhaps that's their mothers. So it's a complete demographic package of the kids. Go ahead. The workshop also talked about standards. Go ahead. And there's our common standards. At the bottom, you see computer-based testing. Why does that matter? That's why I'm having a problem. Hang on one second. Ha. I am a telemarketer. I sell purple shoes. I'm going to call you, and I'm going to say, do you wear shoes? And you're going to say yes or no. Do you like purple? And you're going to say yes or no. Do you buy all the shoes for your family? And you're going to say yes or no. That's a pre-test. I'm learning something about you so that I know how to begin my sales pitch. You've answered my questions, and now I'm going to give you the sales pitch. That's the curriculum. I'm teaching you something about why you need purple shoes. And when I'm done, I'm going to say, shall I put that on your Visa or your MasterCard? That's the assessment. I'm testing you to see if you learned the curriculum and you're going to buy the purple shoes. And if you say Visa or MasterCard, congratulations. You may graduate from this conversation. You passed the test. But if you say, well, no, I'm going to say, well, I'm shocked. What is your objection? That's a diagnosis. I'm finding out why you didn't learn the curriculum. You're going to tell me. I'm going to answer your objection. That's remediation. I'm fixing you. You got it wrong. I have to fix it. And when I'm done, I'm going to say, should I put that on your Visa or your MasterCard? That's a reassessment. I'm testing you again to see if you met the standard. And if you say Visa or MasterCard, congratulations, you may graduate. Now, most of us are very polite, and so we give the telemarketer 2 times through the cycle before we say, okay, that's really enough. I'm not buying those shoes. Go talk to somebody who might. But a child in a classroom can't hang up the phone. And if it's a computerized assessment, they just circle around and around and around until they meet the standard. That's why computerized testing is important. It enables the system to reach individually to that child and keep circling that child around until they meet the standard. Go ahead. Now, in the hearings at the Pennsylvania Senate, the proponents of Common Core said Pennsylvania only got $41.2 million in Race to the Top money, and that's not enough to change the state's behavior. And that's correct, it's not. Go ahead. But Pennsylvania got $1.9 billion in stabilization money, and that is enough to change the state's behavior. And the stabilization money came first. So before they could even talk about Race to the Top, they had to move toward the common standards and assessments and the database. And in return, there was $1.9 billion sitting on the table. Go ahead. Now, after they got the stabilization money, they could apply for Race to the Top. This is the Race to the Top document from the federal government. Go ahead. When the feds give grants, they put together a FAQ, frequently asked question, because they don't want to answer the same question 50 times. So they put it in writing and send it out. This is the FAQs. And part of it was, well, how can you get Race to the Top money? You couldn't even apply unless you had stabilization money approved and coming your way. So you already had to be in compliance with moving the data system, establishing and using it, with moving toward the common standards and assessments before you could even start talking about Race to the Top money. Go ahead. And again. What the feds did was they moved all the federal programs together. Remember we saw Title I in that little chart? Federal money all comes mushed together. So you just didn't have to use that little bit of Race to the Top money. You could push it all together. And the states were supposed to tell the federal government how they pulled the money together to get enough money to do this. And in a few minutes, we'll see what Pennsylvania said to do that. Go ahead. Go ahead. Part of it was, in adopting the Common Core standards, the feds gave each state a deadline. They had to adopt them by August the 2nd of 2010. So not only did they have to adopt them, they had to adopt them by a deadline. They all had to have their standards adopted by August the 2nd of 2010. Go ahead. And again. The states were submitting their applications before that, so they had to tell Washington, okay, what are we going to do to make sure we meet the deadline? They had to submit a plan to make sure that they were done by August of 2010. Go ahead. They also had to say how they were going to move the data systems, and there's that Title I money again, how they're going to push all their money together and bring their data system up to snuff so that Washington could follow along to make sure that they were in compliance. This is Pennsylvania's Race to the Top application. You can see the signatures. Go ahead. But as well as remember the stabilization, it's all true? This one included an extra line that said, I certify that I've read it, I'm committed to it, and I will support its implementation. In other words, Washington didn't want an Eric Holder. I don't know, I don't remember. I don't think I put that in writing. I'm not really sure. Washington didn't want any of those things to happen. So every governor had to sign saying, I read it. So they couldn't come back and say, I'm not really sure what's in it. Oh no, you told me in writing that you read it. Now, do I think Ed Rendell actually read the application? Probably not. But somebody in his staff, in fact, did. Pennsylvania submitted 3 Race to the Top applications, Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3. Ed Rendell signed Phase 1 and Phase 2. Tom Corbett signed Phase 3. So both Democrat and Republican have signed on to these applications.